Uh, listen to this verse. This is from Luke's Gospel. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Now, Jesus actually says this, and it is probably one of the most challenging and difficult things that he says. Because, just think about it for a moment. Jesus, I actually really love my kids. I've got 3 little girls, if you don't know me, and I really love them. Occasionally I want to throw them out the window, but really, are you saying if I'm going to follow you, I need to hate my children? It's extreme, isn't it? Now, I know that often we explain it like this. We say, well, look, Jesus is talking in hyperbole. He's making a point to help us grasp a bigger point, hyperbole. And so he's saying, look, compared to the amount you love me, it looks like you hate those that are dearest to you. And there is probably something in that. But it's just worth saying a few verses on. Verse 33, it's not on the PowerPoint, but Jesus says this: in the same way, those who do not give up everything cannot be my disciple. And you look at the book of Acts, and clearly they still believed in owning personal possessions. So they know that Jesus is not literally saying here that you have to sell everything to follow me. You see, what Jesus is saying in those verses is not so much an ethical imperative. It's not a moral imperative like do not steal, do not lie, and hate your mum and dad. That is not the command. But what he is saying in that verse is to shape our world. It's to help us understand something about who Jesus is, what he's come to do, and what it means to follow him. And so let me just be clear, right? You are meant to honor your parents. You are meant to love and serve your children. My in-laws were at the first service, and I kind of want to say to them, look, really, if there's a point, you need to come and live with us. There's a lot of space in our cupboard under the stairs. It'll be absolutely fine. But we are meant to look after. We are meant to care. Jesus says that. But what are we to understand by what Jesus says? What are we to understand by what he means? If you understand what he means by it, you need to read 1 Samuel 20. 1 Samuel 20. If you've been around this past few weeks, you'll know that we've been looking at David, and David is the secretly anointed king. If you like, this language of anointed king is what's translated in the New Testament as Christ, Messiah. And so as we look at David, the anointed king, he teaches us in a small way something about what it means to be under Jesus and his rule and to be part of his kingdom. And last week, if you were here, you will know that David is in a pickle. 4 times, Saul, who is currently the king on the throne, wants him dead. And you'll remember that some of his attempts end up in kind of comical endings. But from David's perspective, his head is absolutely all over the place. He doesn't know where he can turn. And if you can imagine, we look on at this and we go, oh, David, we know what happens. We know you end up being the king and you end up leading the nation in an astonishing way and taking Jerusalem. You do an astonishing job. But for David at this moment, he doesn't know if he goes around the next corner and someone finds him and kills him. And so where does he go? He goes to his best mate, Jonathan. 20 verse 1. He goes to his best mate, Jonathan. And what do we find? Verses 21 to 23, right? We see Jonathan trusting everything to David. And that sounds like it makes no sense, considering what I've just said. Surely it should be David trusting everything to Jonathan. But let's have a look how it unfolds. Verse 1, let me read it to you. Chapter 20, verse 1. Then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my crime? Have I wronged you, your father, that he's trying to kill me?" And here is David, and just think about it. He's gone to Jonathan. He's saying, "Look, your dad's trying to kill me. He's trying to kill me. He's just this happened, and the hitman and the death squad, and he threw the spear at me for a third time." And look at Jonathan's reply. This is massively disconcerting. Verse 2. "Never," Jonathan replied. "You're not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. Why should he hide this from me? It isn't so." Jonathan says to David, you're losing your head. My dad is not trying to kill you. Now just think about David hearing those words. Okay, there's two things in his head that he thinks could be going on. Either Jonathan is telling him the truth at this point. And if you remember from last week, Jonathan intervened and he ended up reconciling things between Saul and David, and they were friends. And David could be thinking, that's all he knows about, and he hasn't heard what his dad has planned. And so I can trust him. There's one side, but just think about the other side. He hears that and thinks, Jonathan's in on this. My best friend is in cahoots with his dad, and he wants me dead as well. Verse 3. But David took an oath and said, "Your father knows very well that I found favor in your eyes." And he said to himself, "Jonathan must not know, or he will be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, there is only a step between me and death." He says, Jonathan, really, I think this is what's happened. Your dad's worked out that you are for me, and he hasn't filled you in on what he's been plotting, what he's been planning, what he's been carrying out. Verse 4, Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you." He says, "Look, you've got to understand, I do not know anything about this, and David, you can trust me." And so verse 5, David brings together a plan to help Jonathan be convinced that his dad really wants him dead. And this is his plan. Okay, they've got a new moon feast on the 5th. I think you could call it like an office work party, secret party. It's not a secret party. They definitely know they're at a party and a feast, and they get together, and David is one of the key right-hand men, so he'd be expected to be there. And he says, "I won't be there. And when your dad asks you, 'Oh, do you know where David is?' You're to tell him that he's gone back to Bethlehem to see his brothers. It's like a birthday do he just couldn't miss. It's a sacrifice. They're probably going to Nando's. I just thought, it just sounds like something that he really should go to. So I let him go." And he said, "Then see how your dad responds. If your dad goes bananas, he wants me dead. If he says, 'Oh, that sounds reasonable, that sounds fine,' then he doesn't want to kill me." So the plot is set. The plan is set. But there's a little bit more that comes out. Look at verse 8. There's a little bit more. See what David says to Jonathan. "As for you," this is David saying to Jonathan, "show kindness to your servant, for you've brought him into a covenant. If I'm guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father?" He says, "Look, Jonathan, if you really think I'm plotting against your dad, if you really think I'm a threat, if you really think I'm lying to you, then you might as well kill me now." But listen to what Jonathan says, verse 9. "Never! If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you?" Verse 10, "Who will tell me if your father answers harshly?" So he says, look, how am I going to know? If your dad does answer, how do I know that actually I know that he wants to kill me and you know that he wants to kill me? How are we going to work this out? And they come up with another plan. Verse 11, Jonathan says, "Let's go out into the fields." And so they went there together. And verse 18, he says, okay, this is what we're going to do. Tomorrow is the new moon feast. Verse 19, "The day after tomorrow, towards evening, go to the place where you hid when this trouble began." It says, "Go to this rock, and I'm going to get my bow and arrow, and I'm going to send out a couple of arrows. I'll get one of my servant boys to go and chase after the arrow. And if it falls to a side, I'll say, it's fallen to the side, and that is my message to you, you are safe. But if I shout to him, it goes beyond, it's gone beyond you, it means you are not safe and you need to run for your life. That's the plan. It's all a little bit line of duty. Who can you trust? What's going on? All of this. And let me just pause at this moment and say, what a friendship. What a friendship. David and Jonathan are held up as one of the greatest friendships in all of Scripture. Two tough, manly blokes who have an incredibly close and open bond. And there's nothing sexual about it. And what I want to say, men, I think women need to hear this less, because I think women on the whole are much better at building up friendships. That's generalizing. But blokes in this room, you need these sorts of friendships. You need blokes who are brothers in arms, who are following Christ, who you can laugh with and cry with and hit each other on the arm with. Why don't we have those friendships? I think one thing is we fear it being misunderstood. And secondly, I think we probably don't go and play darts enough. Okay, that is a side point. That is a side point. It's an amazing friendship. But what you've got to understand is, verse 11, what follows verse 11? It's not verse 18, it's verse 12. Look at that. Look at that. It's English at its highest, isn't it? Look at that. So it's verse 12. See, what happens in 12 to 17 tells us this is more than just a friendship. See, what is going on here between Jonathan and David is actually more of a relationship with someone, with their future king. See, right at the start of this, David comes before Jonathan in verse 1, and actually literally it says, what is it? He went to Jonathan. It says he comes before Jonathan, and it's the image that Jonathan is the one in charge, and David is the one coming as his servant. Have a look at verse 8. How does David describe Jonathan? He says, show kindness to your servant. David comes and says, I am your servant, Jonathan. But actually, who does Jonathan think has the power? Who does he think who has the power? Actually, he sees it as the other way around. He sees things far more clearly than David. David is here and he thinks, I'm about to die. And Jonathan thinks this. He knows before him is his future king. And there's two clues in what he says in verses 13 and 14. Just have a look at this. Verse 13, look what he says to David. Right at the end of verse 13. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. I.e., my dad was the king. When he was the king, the Lord was with him. When you're the king, may the Lord be with you. Verse 14 and 15. Look at this. He says, but show me unfailing kindness, like the Lord's kindness, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed, and do not ever cut me off from your kindness, from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. You see, Jonathan understands what happens when someone takes the throne. We've seen this a little bit in politics. So when Boris Johnson was made Prime Minister, which he may not be for much longer, but what does the Prime Minister do? Well, they take any potential leaders within their party who could be a threat to their leadership, and either they stick them on the back benches or they give them a position in the cabinet which they know they're going to make a right mess of. So no one thinks, oh, they should be our next leader. They take out potential threats. And if you go back to this incident 3,000 years ago, what would a new king do? They would kill off the family of anyone who might have a claim to the throne. They would get rid of them. They'd get them out of the picture. And here is Jonathan, and he is saying to David, your ascent to the throne is unstoppable, Because when God says it's going to happen, it will happen. And so when you're there, show kindness to me and my family. Now, this is remarkable, right? Because Jonathan, at this point, is in the position of power. He could, the next day, have David behind this rock and go and tell his dad and say, I know exactly where David is. Let's go and take him down. And then the kingdom is mine. He could do that. But do you know what? He's willing to say, I'm not going to take that power. I'm not going to grasp it for myself. David, you are God's anointed king, and so I'm going to give you everything. In a context where David looks like he has got nothing. David is going to be on the run for the rest of 1 Samuel. See, what we have here, verse 16, Jonathan makes an oath. May the Lord call David's enemies to account. And verse 17, Jonathan made David affirm his oath to him out of love because he loved him as he loved himself. But here we have is something more than a deep friendship. It is a king with his subject. But Jonathan is willing to serve and submit to David, even though the kingdom that David is running at the moment looks a little bit rubbish. No one can see it. Doesn't look like it's really going anywhere. But he knows the promises of God that he can build his life again. Why? Why does he do that? Because he knows the future of the kingdom will be glorious. You know, and it's just worth us saying, as we come to Jesus, the King who reigns, let's face it, it can feel and look a little bit rubbish. I mean, it's kind of encouraging, isn't it? We look around the room, we see, there's people of all ages and stages here, and we're singing God's praise, and it's great. But when you think over the course of this morning, there's about 250 people here. You look out the windows, there's 130,000 people looking on thinking, you are nuts. Why are you following Jesus? Seriously, where do you think the kingdom is going? Like, where is this king? Where is this kingdom? Where is it going to end? Where is it going to start? And yet we are here, and there is blessings to being part of his kingdom now, and this is part of it, right? It really is a blessing. But we give ourselves this king knowing the future is glorious. It's eternal. See, Jonathan offers everything up to David. We, if you're following Jesus, we offer everything up to him. But actually, verses 24 to 42 tells us there are consequences. And the consequence for Jonathan is this: he loses his family because of David. He loses family because of David. Have a look at verse 24. David hid in the field. When the new moon feast came, the king sat down to eat, and they have that big feast, and Saul's there, and he sees David's empty seat, and he says, okay, he must be unclean. There's a reason he's not here. He must be unclean, so he'll be here tomorrow. The second day of the feast comes, and he sees the seat empty again. He says, hey, Jonathan, where's the son of Jesse? Where's David gone? Do you know where he goes? And Jonathan's there saying, look, birthday party, Nando's. I said you must go. And at this point, Saul plays his hand in verse 30 with an eruption that is more dramatic than Pompeii. Have a look at it. Verse 30, Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan and said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? Not that I would ever use this with any of my kids, but you know things have gone bad when you're blaming. The reason you've acted like that is because of your mother. It's your mother's fault. You take after your mother. Not me, I'm really good and pure, but kids, it's because of your mother. Obviously, it's always the other way around in my household. No, the reason the kids are misbehaving is because of me, not you, my lovely wife, Grace. But there we go. He's going, you perverse and rebellious woman, you're a son of a... But he says, do you not understand what is going on? Verse 31. Do you not understand what you are losing, Jonathan? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring me, for he must die. And at that point, Jonathan's got his decision. His dad is saying, your future. You know, you were brought up in a royal household. What is Prince George experiencing, training to be the king? Can you imagine what it's felt like for Prince Charles? I've been trained to be the king, and potentially I'm going to be a king when I'm 80. All his life. Here's Jonathan. All his life. That is your destiny. Saul saying to Jonathan, do you not understand? If David lives, this will not be yours. And his dad's going bananas. And can you imagine the pressure at that point to say, do you know what, Dad? You're right. There's this stone. Let's go and deal with the issue. What does Jonathan do? 32. Why should he be put to death, Dad? What's he done? And at this point, Saul so loses his rag and his thinking that verse 34, he gets up from the table in fierce anger. Oh, no, not that one. Sorry, here we go. Verse 33. Then Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. And finally, the penny drops for Jonathan. At that point, he knew his father really wanted to kill David. If you like, Jonathan nails his colours to the mast. And his relationship with Dad is never going to be the same again. You know, Jonathan withdraws from the feast. He's mad. He's really angry because it's so wrong. It's shameful, it says. And the next morning he goes out and he does his bow and arrow trick. And he shouts to the boy, go, run, go, 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 go. And the boy heads home. And we have one of the most beautifully tender moments in verse 41. Look at this. After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed before Jonathan 3 times. Look at the humility of David. With his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and they wept together. But David wept the most. Here is David, the anointed king, weeping for Jonathan. What's he weeping about? Weeping at the cost of this for Jonathan. He weeps as the cost of his relationship with his dad, his future. Huge cost. And they kiss each other. Now, I've seen this sort of kiss. I went to visit a friend out in Amman in Jordan who was doing some work out there, and he took me to a local kebab shop, and it was one of the finest kebabs I've ever eaten. But the owner of the kebab shop came from behind the counter and in Arabic said to him, my little brother. And he grabbed him by the shoulders. Actually, he grabbed him by the head and he kissed him on the head 8 times. Mwah, 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 mwah. My little brother. See, it was a kiss of friendship and welcome and loyalty. And that is what we have here. See, this is not the kiss of a betrayer like Judas. It's a kiss that shows Jonathan loves his king. You know, if you were here last week, we looked at Psalm 2. And Psalm 2 talks about how God has set his king on the throne and he laughs at his enemies. And do you know what the final verse of Psalm 2 says? It says this, it's on the screen. How are you to respond to this king that the Lord will enthrone? Kiss his son, or he will be angry, and your way will lead to your destruction, for his wrath can flare up in a moment. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. As Jonathan kisses David, he's saying, I'm taking refuge in you, David. And actually, you look on, you think, it's nuts. David is about to flee for his life and be on the run for 10 years. But the Lord's anointed is the only place for safety. It's the only place for forgiveness. It's the only place where you can face death and the judgment beyond that and not have to fear it because he is the Lord's anointed, saving King. Do you understand that submit your life to him may mean challenges in life and challenges with your family? You know, I was just thinking about this. I was chatting with a friend of mine, Karen, who became a Christian from a Sikh background. She became a Christian probably about the age of 19. She'd been to university, and she'd always been taught that about God, but she'd never been told who he was, what it really meant to follow him. And she went to university and she met some Christians there, was really interested by what she heard. And she went home at the end of the first year and she went to a local church just down the road, and she heard how Jesus was God and that he'd given his life for her and died to forgive her sins. And she just said, it's true and I've got to follow him. But as she walked home, she knew what that could have meant. She knew that it might have meant she had nowhere to sleep that night, that she could have been literally kicked out of her home that day, and that she'd be treated as dead, written out of the will. See, she loved her mum and dad, but she couldn't walk away from the eternal King Jesus. And so in her parents' eyes, as she turned to Jesus, they thought, you hate us. Now, in God's kindness, her dad didn't kick her out that night. Actually, he thought she would grow out of it. And she hasn't. And the ironic thing she was saying, probably she's been a better Sikh daughter as a Christian than she would have been as a Sikh. You know, in her 20s, there's been costs. In her 20s, her dad would only have let her marry a Sikh man, and so she didn't get married. Because she wouldn't date someone who didn't belong to Jesus. See, for her, loving Jesus more than her family resulted in her being a better daughter, but it cost. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Even when the kingdom can look and feel a little bit rubbish, it's because it does not compare with the weight of glory that is to come. You know, I'm aware, maybe you're a Christian sat here in the room, and you've been following Jesus for years and years and years, and there's something that's come up. It's at work, it's in a relationship, and there is some decision to be made. Am I loyal to Christ, and that will cost? Or am I just going to compromise and give in? And Jonathan says, God says, don't compromise. Jesus' kingdom is worth the cost. Don't forget that. And maybe you've been looking into Christian things. You know, maybe you're here and you've just been weighing up, well, what does it mean to follow Jesus? And actually, just be clear, Jesus is upfront about the small print. Following him will cost you. It will. But he is the king on the throne, and he is the only place of safety. And knowing him now is still better than anything the world has to offer. Jonathan entrusts everything to David. We entrust everything to Jesus, but following David, following Jonathan can cost. Let's bow our heads.